There's a reason why some people run from the very love they've been searching for their whole lives. And it's not because they don't want it. It's not because they don't crave it. It's because the love of a super empath is unlike anything they've ever known before. It's not surface level. It's not transactional. It's a love that pierces through the armor. And when that kind of love shows up, it doesn't just touch the heart, it shakes the entire foundation of the soul. Avoidants fear this kind of love because it mirrors back everything they've been trying to escape. Imagine standing in front of a mirror that doesn't just reflect your face, but your wounds, your fears, your hidden scars. That's what happens when they meet a super empath. Suddenly, they can't hide behind their distance, their silence, their stories. And that kind of exposure is terrifying. But let's get honest. The fear isn't really about the empath. The fear is about being seen. To be fully seen, fully known, and still loved, this is the deepest longing of the human heart. And yet, for someone who's built a life on running from pain, being seen feels like a threat instead of a gift. So they push away the very person who sees them most clearly. Here's the paradox. The love of a super empath doesn't just comfort, it disrupts, it interrupts the cycle of avoidance. It forces a choice, hide behind walls or step into truth, and truth is dangerous to the ego. Because truth dismantles masks, truth strips away control, and when someone has lived believing that control equals safety, letting go feels like death. But here's the higher principle. Love isn't here to destroy you. It's here to free you, that fear, that resistance. It's not a sign to run. It's an invitation to grow. It's life saying you've been playing small, you've been hiding, and now it's time to expand. The super empath becomes a divine mirror, showing not just your wounds, but also your potential. And yes, that's scary because transformation always is. The truth revealed is this: avoidants don't really fear the empath. They fear the part of themselves that awakens in the presence of an empath. They fear the tenderness they buried. They fear the love they once lost. They fear the surrender that leads to healing. And yet that very surrender is the bridge to the life they've always wanted. So here, this love is not the enemy. The one who sees you deeply is not the threat. The threat is the story that tells you to keep running. But when you stop running, when you stand still and allow love to touch you, you discover the truth. You were never meant to be distant. You were meant to be whole. And the love of a super empath is not here to break you. It's here to remind you of who you really are. When an avoidant encounters the love of a super empath, the first thing that shakes them to their core is the mirror effect. This love isn't ordinary. It's not shallow, and it's not something they can easily dismiss or run from without feeling its pull. A super empath's love reflects back to them not just the good, but the hidden parts of themselves they've buried for years. It's like standing in front of a mirror that doesn't just show their face, but the very wounds and scars they've worked so hard to cover up. And suddenly, they're faced with the truth of who they are, stripped of the armor they've built around their hearts. This is terrifying because most avoidants have spent a lifetime crafting distance as a form of protection. They believe if they control the closeness, they control the risk of being hurt. But when the love of a super empath enters their life, that illusion shatters. They're confronted with a reflection that says, I see you. I see the parts you've hidden from the world. And I see the parts you've hidden from yourself. That kind of mirror is both beautiful and brutal. It's beautiful because it holds the power of transformation. It's brutal because it strips away comfort. Imagine spending years building walls and suddenly realizing that someone's gaze can cut right through them without effort. That gaze doesn't just notice, it understands. And understanding is what avoidants fear the most. They fear that if someone sees them fully, they will see weakness, flaws, brokenness. Yet what a super empath sees is not weakness at all. It's humanity. But the avoidant doesn't know how to process that because they've conditioned themselves to equate vulnerability with danger. The mirror effect of an empath's love forces them to confront unresolved pain. Old memories of rejection, abandonment, betrayal rise to the surface. These memories are so deeply rooted that they've shaped the very identity of the avoidant. They've told themselves, I must stay in control. I must not let anyone get too close. If they don't see all of me, then I cannot be hurt. But the presence of an empath dismantles that story without even trying. Their love is too pure, too patient, too penetrating to allow the avoidant to stay hidden. This is why avoidance is often not about rejecting the person. They're not rejecting the empath. They're rejecting the mirror. Because when they look into it, they can no longer deny the truth. And here's the paradox: the avoidant both craves and fears this mirror. Deep down, they long for someone who truly sees them. They long for connection that goes beyond surface level interactions. They want to be known and loved for who they are, not for the masks they wear. But when that desire is finally met, it terrifies them because it means dropping the very defenses that have kept them safe for so long. The empath's love becomes a reflection of possibility, a glimpse of the life they could have if they stopped running. But possibility always comes with a price: the death of the old identity. That death feels like a threat even though it's really the beginning of freedom. The mirror effect is unavoidable. It's the soul's way of saying, look at yourself, see what you've been hiding, see who you could become. And when an avoidant looks into that mirror, they feel exposed, vulnerable, and overwhelmed. But the mirror isn't punishment, it's a gift. The question is whether they will embrace the reflection or continue running from it. And this is why the love of a super empath is both the most healing and the most frightening thing an avoidant will ever encounter. When someone who leans avoidant comes face to face with the love of a super empath, the greatest fear that rises inside them is the fear of being seen. At the core of every avoidant lies a paradox. They deeply crave intimacy, connection, and love, yet they fear the very thing that would fulfill them. They live in a cycle of wanting closeness, but feeling unsafe when it arrives. The reason is that being seen strips them of control. When an empath enters their life, their presence doesn't just offer affection, it pierces through the walls. They don't just hear the words spoken, they feel the emotions underneath. They don't just see the mask, they see the human soul behind it. And for someone who has spent years, sometimes decades, hiding behind protective armor, that kind of presence is overwhelming. To be fully seen means there's no place to hide. The avoidant who has mastered the art of keeping distance suddenly finds that distance collapsing in the presence of a super empath. They may try to pull back, create space, or even push away, but the truth of who they are is still illuminated by the empath's light. It's as if the empath has a radar for authenticity, a way of seeing through every defense mechanism and every carefully rehearsed strategy to avoid vulnerability. And in that moment, the avoidant doesn't feel powerful. They feel exposed. Exposure to them is dangerous because it brings up a lifetime of fears, the fear of rejection, the fear of abandonment, the fear of not being enough. What makes this so intense is that the super empath doesn't have to try to break down walls. They simply are. Their natural way of loving, their natural way of noticing, makes the avoidant feel seen in a way no one else ever has. This sight goes beyond appearances. It touches the tender child still living inside the avoidant, the part of them that longed for unconditional love, but never felt safe enough to receive it. When that childlike part of the avoidant is seen, it triggers both a longing and a terror. The longing says, this is what I've been waiting for. The terror says, if I accept this, I could lose it, and I won't survive the loss. This fear of being seen often leads avoidants to sabotage. They may create conflict, withdraw suddenly, or criticize the very person who makes them feel loved. These actions aren't signs of disinterest, they're defenses. They think, if I can create distance, I can control the risk of being hurt. But in reality, every attempt to push away only proves how deeply they are being impacted. Because the truth is, you can't fear something that doesn't touch you. And the love of a super empath touches them so profoundly that it feels almost unbearable. Being seen by an empath also forces the avoidant to confront their own story. They can no longer hide behind the identity of being strong, detached, or independent. Suddenly, they're faced with the reality that someone can see their fears, their insecurities, and their desires, and still stand there offering love. That unconditional acceptance is disarming. It dismantles the idea that love always comes with judgment or conditions. Yet to receive that kind of acceptance requires letting go of pride, of control, of the old ways of protecting themselves. That's not easy. To the avoidant, it feels like a free fall, a surrender, a risk too big to take. And yet deep inside, there's a recognition. The recognition that to be seen and still loved is the very healing their soul has always sought. They may fight it, resist it, even run from it, but a part of them knows that the fear of being seen is really the gateway to freedom. The love of a super empath brings this truth into the light that being seen is not a danger, but a gift. That vulnerability is not weakness, but the birthplace of connection. And the only way for the avoidant to step into the fullness of who they are is to stop hiding from the gaze that sees them most clearly. Avoidants often believe that the way they manage relationships is their greatest strength. They rely on control, control over timing, control over distance, control over the pace at which intimacy develops. They convince themselves that as long as they are the ones setting the terms, they can protect themselves from the pain of rejection or abandonment. Control becomes their shield. They hold people at arm's length not because they don't feel love, but because they fear what love might demand of them. Then, into this carefully managed world walks a super empath, carrying a love that refuses to be boxed in, a love that cannot be manipulated, timed, or neatly contained. This love is pure presence, unshakable in its intensity. And for the avoidant, it feels like a disruption to the entire system they have built to stay safe. The empath doesn't play by the avoidance rules, not because they're trying to rebel, but because their love is too authentic to be bent by fear. The avoidant may try to create distance, expecting the empath to retreat or withhold affection in response. But instead, the empath remains steady. Their presence is consistent, their energy unshaken, and their love doesn't collapse under silence or withdrawal. This disrupts the avoidant's illusion of control. Suddenly, the tactics that have always worked to regulate closeness no longer carry the same power. They can push, but the empath doesn't disappear. They can retreat, but the empath doesn't chase with desperation. Instead, the empath's love just is. It exists like a force of nature, unmovable and undeniable. This disruption terrifies the avoidant because it exposes how fragile their control really is. They believe that by pulling away, they could dictate the rhythm of intimacy. But the empath's love doesn't fit into that rhythm. It has its own frequency, one that resonates with truth and authenticity. In that frequency, the avoidant feels something they can't manipulate. They feel deeply seen, deeply felt, and deeply known. And that's not something they can turn off by creating space. The love still lingers in the silence. The present still lives in their mind even when they try to escape it. They realize that control over distance is just an illusion, because real love doesn't vanish when you run from it. There's a deeper reason this feels so unsettling. Control is the avoidance strategy to manage fear, but underneath the control is a longing to be loved without conditions. When a super empath shows up with that kind of love, it's both a dream and a nightmare. It's the dream because it's exactly what they've always needed. It's the nightmare because it strips away their excuses, their defenses, and their ability to hide behind distance. They can no longer claim that no one has ever truly loved them. They can no longer justify their walls as necessary for survival. The empath's love proves them wrong simply by existing. That's why it feels disruptive, because it forces a confrontation with truth. The truth is that love cannot be controlled. It cannot be confined to the avoidance terms. It's not a negotiation, it's an awakening. And when the avoidant realizes this, they feel torn between the safety of the familiar and the pull of the unknown. The familiar tells them, stay guarded, stay distant, you're safer this way. But the unknown whispers, let go, surrender, there is more for you than you've ever allowed yourself to receive. The empath becomes the catalyst for this internal battle. Their love calls the avoidant into transformation, and transformation always begins with disruption. This is why avoidants fear the love of a super empath. It robs them of the illusion that they are in control. It reveals that their strategies for safety have only kept them trapped. And in the presence of that love, they are faced with a choice to keep holding on to control and stay stuck in the old cycle, or release the grip and allow love to do what it was always meant to do. Heal, expand, and set them free. When an avoidant meets the love of a super empath, one of the most unsettling experiences they face is the confrontation with truth. For much of their life, they have survived by wearing masks, masks of independence, self-sufficiency, even indifference. These masks are not who they really are, but rather who they've learned to be in order to protect themselves from pain. They've convinced themselves, and sometimes even the world, that they don't need intimacy as much as others do, that closeness is optional, that vulnerability is weakness. But when a super empath steps into their life, that narrative begins to crack. The empath's love doesn't just touch the surface. It exposes the gap between who they pretend to be and who they truly are. That gap becomes impossible to ignore. And the truth rises to the surface whether the avoidant wants it to or not. The reason this truth is so threatening is because it strips away the comfort of denial. Avoidants often live in a space where they can manage relationships on their own terms, believing they're in control of their emotions and connections. But the empath's love doesn't allow that facade to last. They see through the mask and connect with the person underneath. They don't fall in love with the avoidance defenses. They fall in love with their essence, their soul, their authentic self. And when someone reflects that authenticity back to you, it's impossible to keep pretending that the mask is enough. The avoidant suddenly finds themselves standing in front of a mirror that shows both the image they've projected and the self they've hidden. And the dissonance between the two is undeniable. This confrontation with truth is painful because it asks for honesty not just with the empath, but with oneself. The avoidant is forced to face questions they'd rather avoid. Who am I really beneath these defenses? What do I truly want? Why am I so afraid of letting love in? These questions stir old wounds, memories of moments where vulnerability was met with pain, times when trust led to disappointment, times when openness left scars. It feels easier to keep pretending that distance is strength than to admit that distance is actually fear. But the empath's love doesn't let them stay in that illusion. Their love insists on truth, not as a weapon, but as a pathway to freedom. The most challenging part for the avoidant is realizing that the person who sees them most clearly isn't condemning them. The empath doesn't look at their flaws and turn away. They see the brokenness, the contradictions, the fears, and still offer love. This is foreign to the avoidant, who has spent so long believing that if anyone saw the real them, they would leave. Instead, the empath stays, reflecting a truth that is uncomfortable, yet profoundly healing, that they are lovable even in their vulnerability, even in their imperfection. But this truth collides violently with the story the avoidant has carried for years, that they must protect themselves at all costs. The confrontation with truth always feels like a choice. The avoidant can either run from it, reinforcing their defenses, or they can lean into it, risking the pain but opening the door to transformation. The empath's love doesn't demand which path they choose, but it makes the old ways harder to live with. Once the truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. Once they've tasted the possibility of being fully known and fully loved, no amount of distance will feel the same. This is why the empath's love feels so dangerous. It's not because it harms, it's because it awakens. It awakens a truth the avoidant has been trying to bury, that beneath all the walls, they long for love that is real, and that longing will never go away, no matter how far they run. This is the divine disruption of truth. It does not come gently, because love has no interest in maintaining illusions. Love comes to strip away the lies, the masks, the half-lived stories, and to reveal the fullness of what's possible. For the avoidant, that confrontation can feel unbearable, but it is also the beginning of liberation. The truth doesn't come to punish them. It comes to set them free. When the love of a super empath enters the life of an avoidant, it doesn't just feel like another relationship. It feels like a divine challenge. It is as though life itself has placed before them a mirror and whispered, "It's time to grow." This kind of love carries a spiritual weight because it calls forth a transformation that the avoidant has spent years resisting. For the avoidant, love is not just affection, it's danger, because love demands surrender, and surrender is the one thing they fear most. They've built their identity around control, around independence, around never needing anyone too much. Yet the presence of a super empath dismantles all of that. It awakens something inside them that is bigger than fear, bigger than avoidance, and this awakening feels like both a blessing and a threat. At the soul level, love is never about comfort. It is about expansion. The super empath brings a love so pure, so unwavering, that it becomes impossible for the avoidant to remain unchanged. They feel the stirrings of parts of themselves they had locked away: tenderness, vulnerability, longing, even hope. But for someone who has lived years suppressing these qualities, their sudden reappearance feels like an earthquake. Everything they thought they knew about who they are and how they relate to others begins to shake. And in that shaking lies the divine challenge. Will they cling to the old identity, or will they allow themselves to step into the unknown and embrace growth? The empath's love doesn't simply make the avoidant feel good, it makes them feel alive in a way that terrifies them. It confronts them with the truth that their soul has been starving. They realize that while independence has given them safety, it has also kept them isolated. While control has kept them from rejection, it has also robbed them of intimacy. This recognition is not intellectual, it is visceral. Their heart beats differently, their body reacts, their emotions surge in ways they can't control. It feels divine because it transcends logic. It feels spiritual because it reminds them of something eternal. The human soul was never meant to hide, it was meant to connect. This is why the challenge feels divine. It's not just about romance, it's about destiny. The avoidant is being asked by life itself to evolve, to grow beyond fear, to stop running and finally face the truth of who they are. The empath becomes the catalyst for this growth. Not by force, but by presence. Their love says you can stay the same or you can step into who you were meant to be. And the avoidant feels the weight of that choice in every interaction. It's not just about whether they will commit to a relationship, it's about whether they will commit to their own becoming. The fear comes from knowing that transformation requires surrender. To accept the love of a super empath, the avoidant must release control. They must allow themselves to be seen, to be vulnerable, to trust in something greater than their defenses. This surrender feels like death to the ego, but it is life to the soul. And deep down, the avoidant knows this. They sense that the empath's love isn't here to destroy them, it's here to awaken them. But awakening hurts because it means letting go of everything that no longer serves them. It means admitting that the armor they've carried all their lives is no longer protecting them, but imprisoning them. This divine challenge is not accidental. It's life offering them an invitation to step into freedom, to heal, to transform. Some will resist it, some will run from it, but they can never unfeel what the empath's love has stirred within them. Because once the soul has been touched by love that pure, the old ways of living no longer satisfy. The avoidant may fear this challenge, but it is the very challenge that holds the key to their liberation. At the core of every avoidant lies a paradox that keeps them in a constant state of inner conflict. On the surface, they appear calm, in control, even detached, but deep within, they crave the very thing they push away. When they encounter the love of a super empath, this paradox becomes undeniable. They feel the safest with this person. Their presence is grounding, their love is steady, their energy is pure acceptance. Yet at the same time, that very safety terrifies them because it threatens everything they believe about how to survive in the world. To the avoidant, safety has always meant distance. If they control closeness, they minimize the risk of being hurt. But in the presence of an empath, safety no longer comes from distance, it comes from closeness. And that reversal shakes their entire foundation. The paradox grows stronger the more they experience the love of a super empath. When they're with them, they feel at peace in a way that's unfamiliar but deeply comforting. They feel seen and understood without having to explain themselves. It feels like home, safe, warm, unconditional. But the avoidance mind interprets this safety as danger because it requires surrender. It requires letting go of the old strategies that once protected them. The closer they get to that feeling of safety, the louder their fear becomes. They begin to imagine loss, betrayal, or abandonment. They tell themselves, if I let this in, it will eventually disappear and I won't survive that pain. So even though they feel safest in the arms of the empath, they retreat, sabotaging the very connection that could bring them healing. This paradox of safety and fear is exhausting because it creates a cycle of push and pull. The avoidant draws near when they feel the pull of love, but the moment intimacy deepens, they withdraw, terrified of being too dependent. It's not because the empath did anything wrong, but because the avoidant's nervous system is wired to see closeness as a threat. Their body remembers past experiences of being let down, abandoned, or judged. So now, even when love is safe, it feels dangerous. And the empath's unwavering presence only intensifies the conflict because it proves that this time is different. The avoidant can no longer justify their fear by saying, no one ever stays. Here is someone who stays. And that truth unsettles them even more. What makes the paradox even more difficult is that deep down, the avoidant knows the truth. They know they want the love of the empath. They know they feel alive and whole in their presence. They know that when they're close, they're not just surviving, they're thriving. Yet the fear whispers louder than the truth. The fear tells them, don't trust it, don't depend on it, don't let it in fully. And so they wrestle between two voices, the voice of love calling them home and the voice of fear convincing them to run. This inner battle is not a reflection of weakness, but of conditioning. They were taught somewhere along the line that love equals danger, and now they must unlearn that story to embrace what is right in front of them. The paradox of safety and fear is ultimately an invitation. It shows the avoidant that the life they've been living is too small for their soul. Safety doesn't come from distance, it comes from trust. Fear doesn't have to dictate their choices, love can. The empath's role is not to fix or rescue them, but to hold the mirror steady, to remind them that true safety comes when they finally stop running. And in that realization, the avoidant stands at a crossroads. Keep clinging to the fear that has defined them, or surrender to the safety that has been waiting for them all along. This paradox is not meant to torment them, but to transform them. It is the final lesson the superempath's love reveals, that the very place they fear most closest is the very place their soul has been longing to call home. And so the truth is clear. What avoidance, fear, and the love of a superempath is not the love itself, but the transformation that love demands. It is the breaking of walls, the surrender of control, the unveiling of their true self, and the awakening of a soul that was never meant to hide. Love in its purest form is not here to wound, but to heal, not here to weaken, but to set free. And when we stop running, when we choose to face what feels unbearable, we discover that what we feared most was always the key to our freedom. Thank you for opening your heart, for daring to listen, and for walking this journey of growth with me. Remember, the greatest love is not the one that keeps you comfortable, but the one that calls you into who you were always destined to be.